Right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving headfirst into a truly fascinating inquiry put forward by the cybersecurity firm I-S3. They've been peering into the rather labyrinthian corridors of the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, or METI for short. We're going to unpack their latest regulatory puzzle, which is the JC-STAR cybersecurity certification system. Now, on paper, this is an initiative that promises a fortified, absolutely hacker-proof power grid. But according to I-S3's research, this system seems to operate slightly less on the established laws of computer science and, well, a bit more on the highly unpredictable logic of administrative red tape.
So riddle me this. When is a self-declaration not actually a self-declaration? Well, when it's a secret government checklist. This beautifully captures the sheer absurdity sitting right at the heart of the JC-STAR system. Today, we're going to break down exactly how a supposedly transparent security standard has somehow transformed into something quite remarkably different.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The Ministry of Paradoxes. Self-declaration versus secret approval. The JC-STAR label, which is proudly issued by the Information Technology Promotion Agency, puts up a very noble facade. JC-STAR is designed as an IoT security label meant to raise the baseline for connected energy equipment. And let's be perfectly clear here, ensuring that our solar panels and power grids aren't easily hijacked by bad actors is a fantastic objective. We absolutely all want that. But the devil, as always, is buried in the administrative details. Here's where the deadpan comedy of international regulation really kicks into gear. You see, internationally, a self-declaration of conformity, something like the EU's CE marking, means exactly what it says. You declare that you meet the public standards, and it's mechanically processed. Simple, right? But the reality of JSTAR is quite different. Under this scheme, applications can actually be rejected during a secret verification process, and the reasons for your rejection aren't even publicly disclosed. It's honestly a bit like taking a driving test where the examiner fails you in complete silence and then flat out refuses to tell you which traffic law you supposedly broke.
If you think that's peculiar, just wait. Moving right along to Section 2, Wind versus Solar Asymmetry. The rules change depending on the weather. To really grasp this, we need to quickly define a concept called a trust boundary. For over 30 years now, international cybersecurity standards like IEC 2443 have operated on one very simple, brilliant premise. You protect the network perimeter. You build a massive wall and a highly secure gate, your firewall and gateway, to protect all the vulnerable little devices inside the castle. It is absolutely standard, universally accepted engineering logic. And this brilliantly illustrates where JSTAR goes completely off script. For wind power, the security requirement very sensibly targets the gateway and firewall, meaning it secures the boundary. Makes sense. But for solar PV, securing that boundary is inexplicably just a recommendation. Instead, the strict requirement is placed entirely on the endpoints themselves, like the power conditioning systems. It's quite literally like leaving the front door of your house wide open, but insisting that the toaster sitting in your kitchen has a high-security padlock. It's madness.
So why on earth would the rules be so lopsided? Well, according to the research from IS3, it's actually a compromise born from supply chain operational constraints. You see, a huge chunk of wind power devices used in Japan are foreign-made. If they applied a strict endpoint rule there, it would have brought the entire wind industry to a grinding halt. So they just compromised for wind. This reveals a rather dramatic irony, doesn't it? The sensible, internationally recognized cybersecurity rule was likely adopted for wind power purely out of logistical convenience, meaning this isn't a purely risk-based technical decision at all. Which builds into an even larger elephant in the room in Section 3. Tech standard or geopolitics, the hidden agenda. Because if the rules aren't purely based on technical risk, what exactly is JC-STAR evaluating? Well, tucked into the evaluation criteria, they'll find this massive, glaring phrase, foreign legal environments. This is exactly where non-technical criteria start creeping into a supposed technical standard. The system isn't just looking at the software code on a solar inverter anymore, it genuinely appears to be evaluating the geopolitical environment of the manufacturer itself. Which begs a rather profound question. Is this actually a technical certification, or is it an economic security policy just wearing an engineer's hard hat? Blurring the lines between a strict engineering standard and a geopolitical vetting process is incredibly risky business. If you're enforcing an economic security policy, international trade norms dictate that you should do so openly and transparently, not hide it away inside an opaque, secretive, technical checklist.
And this brings us to the highly professional yet devastatingly logical intervention by IS3. Let's look at Section 4, 8 questions for METI, I-S3's polite interrogation.
These 8 public questions were formally submitted to the Japanese Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, framing a sort of incredibly polite interrogation. We are now in the rather delightful position of waiting for the government to explain the unexplainable.
So let's look at the first half of those questions. I-S3 asks me these straight up. Are we evaluating tech, or are we evaluating economic security? Why do the rejection results seem strangely skewed by the nationality of the applicant? Why not just use a transparent, internationally accepted framework? And perhaps the most intriguing question they pose is this: what happens to these rules if foreign relations suddenly improve? Because if this is truly a technical standard, surely a severe cyber vulnerability doesn't magically disappear just because 2 diplomats shake hands over a nice dinner, right? Now you might be wondering, why does this matter so much right now? Well, because of this looming date, April 2027. That is the hard deadline when JC-STAR compliance becomes a mandatory requirement for connecting high-voltage solar PV to the grid. If you don't have the secret label, you simply can't connect. It's shaping up to be an absolute bottleneck for the entire energy sector. The final questions from I-S3 really turn the screws. They're asking if this specific design is actually defensible against serious international trade pushback, for instance, at the WTO. They essentially ask METI the ultimate question: have you evaluated the actual risk of building a system that you fundamentally cannot explain on a logical level? It's a complete masterclass in pointing out that administrative red tape might eventually just strangle the administrators themselves. So, the crucial point is, how do we actually escape this bureaucratic maze and secure the power grid? Let's pivot to Section 5, the physical separation solution, sanity restored with LEAA. The alternative proposed by I-S3 is called LEAA. That's the Load Equivalent Autonomous Resilience Architecture, and it solves the cyber risk entirely through 3 beautifully simple steps. First, you put a physical air gap between the internet-connected logic layers and the actual physical protection systems. Second, you make the solar facility behave purely as a standard load from the grid's perspective. And third, autonomous islanding. This means the system can safely and automatically disconnect itself if things go haywire without sitting around waiting for a command from some vulnerable cloud server. At the absolute heart of this solution is the Reverse Power Flow Prevention Relay, or RPR. The core philosophy here is wonderfully grounded. Physics beats software every time. Even if a solar inverter is 100% compromised by the world's absolute best hackers, a physical, hardwired relay will strictly follow the laws of electrical physics. It will physically block power from flowing dangerously backward into the grid. You simply cannot hack physics, period. Which brings us to our final, slightly provocative thought for the day. As we barrel toward that 2027 enforcement deadline, will the ministry actually answer the call for transparency and clarify their paradoxical rules? Or, at the end of the day, will the indisputable, unbreakable laws of physics have to step in to save the power grid from a labyrinth of administrative red tape? It's a genuinely fascinating standoff between bureaucracy and engineering, and I, for one, absolutely cannot wait to see the government's response. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.